really a great delight to introduce our keynote speaker. I've had the honor and the privilege to serve on the National Science Foundation Science Advisory Committee and to hear our speaker talk to us and to work with us as we work through the day. So we have with us Dr. Sathru Raman Panchanathan. Oh, I didn't butcher that too badly. I didn't get it right. Say Thru Raman Panchanathan. As he'll tell you, he is known by a nickname and a shorter name of Paunch, which is how those of us who've had an opportunity to work with him speak to him. He is a computer scientist and is the 15th director of the National Science Foundation. NSF is an $8.8 billion independent federal agency. I understand that NSF funds almost 80% of all the fundamental research in the United States. But not only is it in size and numbers, but it is the only government agency that's charged with advancing science and research in all fields of scientific discovery and technological innovation and STEM education. So Dr. Panchanathan has a distinguished career in science, technology, engineering, and education that spans more than 3 decades. He served as executive vice president of Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he founded the Center for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing, a very timely topic for us here today still. Prior to becoming the director of NSF, Panch served on the National Science Board for 6 years and also served on chaired numerous high-level research and innovation organizations. He is a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, American Association for Advancement of Science, the Association for Computing and Machinery, and other prestigious engineering organizations. Dr. Panchanathan's scientific contributions have advanced the area of human-centered multimedia computing, haptic user interfaces, person-centered ubiquitous computing technologies for empowering individuals with a range of abilities. It's a great honor to honor you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terry. It's great to be here. Terry, thank you so much. And first of all, I have to express my gratitude to Terry for serving in our advisory committee, because these are the people that really bring the rich perspectives, contexts, and contributions from the scientific community. And without that, NSF will not be what it is. So I just want to make sure that you all understand how important it is that these folks serve. And usually the only thing that they get is thanks. And so that's why I want to make sure I give them profusely thank Terry and the team for all the work that they do. For some folks standing there are enough seats here if you want to, unless you prefer to stand, because some do. And so I just want to make sure that you don't just run away because you're standing, and I'm securing you to your seats. So I'm just going to get started, and I want to thank Craig for your remarks and for your leadership of ISI. I mean, it's a great institution. I was here a few years ago when I was at Arizona State trying to see how did they get this institution to work so well and learn some lessons from here. And so Craig and to your predecessors, I think a fantastic job that you do here. So I just want to acknowledge that first. So John, thanks again for your workshop conceptualization, which I think is very, very exciting. So thank you so much, John. And Steve, good to see you from Arlington and all the way here. So good to see you here. And Dave, good to have you join us at NSF and hopefully soon. So, and then most importantly, Yolanda and I were in a panel together just a few months ago in South by Southwest. So I enjoyed being in the panel with you talking about the future of AI, Yolanda. And so thank you for your contributions and leadership. So it's great to be here. And so, I thought that what I would do is sometimes it's good to contextualize NSF. Some people know NSF, but at ISI, you may not know NSF as much as you know DARPA sometimes. So I just want to contextualize NSF. And I also want to talk about the NSF in terms of the new NSF. So where we are heading into the future. So I thought that might be appropriate. But also putting the flavor of computing, because this is about computing and what we need to do into the future and what programs that we've been engaged in that aligns with the new NSF thinking, and also what we need to do in terms of advancing computing into the future. These are not unrelated, they are tightly coupled. So I just want to make sure that I mentioned that too. So I thought I would talk about this term that I've started to use quite a bit. I call it innovation anywhere, opportunities everywhere. because this is something that you will see through my talk. I will probably reflect on this again and again and again in terms of the fact that this is a very, very important moment and in the nation, and I want to make sure that people understand that this imperative is exceedingly vital as we move into the future. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in terms of what it means, and so how do we accelerate the frontiers of computing research. So that's basically the overall agenda, and so here is what I'm going to do. For those of you who are not familiar with NSF completely, in 1945, an amazing visionary scientist, Vannevar Bush, when we came out of World War II, came out with this fantastic treatment he wrote to the then President Roosevelt. He said, "Science, the endless frontier." You know, what can we do in terms of taking the fantastic innovations that comes out in times of war? How might we then see how we can accelerate the progress that benefits humanity, of course, national security and society and economic prosperity? So as he wrote up that beautiful treatment, Science, the Endless Frontier, to President Roosevelt at that time, 5 years later, President Truman, and more importantly, through an act of Congress, NSF was created, and NSF, the National Science Board, which is made up of 24 people, were created as an entity to move forward the aspirations of the nation in terms of science and technology. Terry talked about the fact that 80% of the fundamental research in computer science, is funded by NSF. So NSF, has laid the, pathways for many, many innovations of computing from the past to the present to the future. And I call them tire tracks. I mean, if you go back and look at anything that has happened, you go back and look at tire tracks. The National Academies did a beautiful treatment on tire tracks. You'll always find something of a tire track back to projects that were funded by NSF. I mean, even simple things like this, 10,000 projects of NSF in this one. So, I mean, you can always find those fantastic tire tracks back to many, many things that you look at. And that's the fascinating part of what NSF does. So, when NSF was created, the mission statement was pretty straightforward. There are three basic components: promoting the progress of science, advancing national health and prosperity and welfare, and of course, advancing the national security. These are the three component parts in securing the national defense as it is outlined here. These three component parts. And what excites me about this mission statement is, these days, every organization, a new leader will come and they want to completely write a new mission statement, a new vision statement, a new strategic plan, all of that stuff. Nothing wrong with that. But this was 75 years ago. And I wouldn't change a word in this today. And that's the power of this mission statement. It stands the test of time in terms of what NSF does as we move forward into the future. So as we think about the next steps, and I'm supposed to point it where am I pointing here? To move it? It doesn't seem to move, so I'm asking the question.
Oh, should just be.
Okay, great. I need to press it harder, is that right?
Actually, I think it turned off.
It turned off. Now, essentially, code word is you need to stock less. Slides. Okay, I got it. So when I came to NSF, I started talking about this moment which is very, very important. Without overstating that, there are three important characteristics of this moment. The first characteristic of this moment is that we have never seen global competition like this ever before. The intensity, the intentionality of global competition is really there to see. And I always talk about global competition in the following terms. Global competition is a great thing. We all know that. Competition in general is a great thing. It is not about the competitor, it's about us. It's about how we can unleash the unbelievable excellence that we have, that we are able to manifest in many, many ways and express it in many, many ways. And that's what this global competition, this moment is challenging us. It's challenging us, it's motivating us, it's inspiring us to do better, faster, more. And therefore, you're going to see that manifestation of what I'm talking about in terms of what the NSF, therefore, vision has to be as we think about the future. Now, then the other characteristic of this moment is even more profound. As I came from a state called Arizona, a small state, I realized the power of access, the power of making sure that talent and ideas that are democratized all across our nation needs to be part of this future of prosperity that we are trying to build, whether it is in computing or it doesn't matter, whatever it is, in whatever aspect of science and technology or any general prosperity for that matter. We need inclusion as a very, very important paradigm of thinking about the future. And therefore, I termed this in the following ways. And when I was part of the National Science Board before joining as a director, before taking on as a director, we were, in the process of putting together a fantastic conceptualization called 2030, the Vision 2030 document of NSP. And one of those component parts is how do you get talent, everywhere energized, and we call it the missing millions. The missing millions of talent that has not been brought into the fold and needs to be brought in order to take full advantage of the unbelievable ideas and talent all across the nation, across the broad socioeconomic demographic, across the rich diversity, as well as across the geographic spread of our nation. That is everywhere, rural, urban, it doesn't matter what it is. So we need to bring these missing millions into the fold. Okay. And so that's a very, very important imperative. And this moment is challenging us. For far too long, I think we have left a lot of people behind as we are advancing this prosperous future for our nation. So we need to change the trajectory a little bit. And then finally, people will talk to me and they'll ask me, Panch, I think science, how do you manage to, I get these questions all the time. How do you manage to do this when, some part of the group does not believe in science, all of that? I just said, stop. Okay, I will tell you this much. I went through my confirmation process. I met with many folks on all sides of the aisle. And then subsequently, I've been interacting with almost everybody. On Friday, I was with the president in Ohio as we were doing the groundbreaking. I'm supposed to clarify that, President Biden. So President Biden, in Ohio for the groundbreaking of Intel event. And then I was with Senator Portman, Senator Sherrod Brown, and all the congressmen, not only from Ohio, but from other states too, present there. I can tell you, I interact with all of them. All of them are excited by science. All of them are excited by what science and technology can do for our nation and how important it is for what has to be done for the nation. So if you have any doubts about bipartisan nature of science support, drop it. My confirmation was unanimous. So if that is another indication of you thinking about how science is viewed, you have to rethink this. So I just don't want us to get into this negative thinking. And so as computing scientists, I just want to set the framing right. Okay, we have a great moment right now in our nation where science, technology, and engineering are celebrated and, more importantly, invested in. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And therefore, I just want to take this moment, this unique moment of the missing millions as a challenge, global competition not as a challenge but as an opportunity, but more importantly, bipartisanship, which is something that is a tremendous opportunity also. So when I came to NSF 2 years ago, I thought, why not we just lay out a simple set of 3 things building up on the mission of NSF. First is, how do we advance the frontiers of research into the future? There's no surprise in this part of the pillar, because NSF has been doing this fantastically for the last 72 years, over 7 decades, unleashing unbelievable possibilities all across the nation. So at this moment, therefore, what we need to do is, I call it strengthening at speed and scale. Strengthening at speed and scale. This is a moment that is calling upon us to ensure that whatever we have been doing really well, we need to strengthen it, we need to scale it, we need to speed it up where appropriate. And so that's an important thing that we need to do. If you have any questions about what NSF has been doing, over 250 Nobel laureates, have been supported by NSF. I think every agency across, I talked to all my peers across the globe, even inside the United States, my peers in other agencies, they look to this as a phenomenal achievement of what NSF has made possible. Clearly, the ideas come from the people like you, but the investments that NSF makes very early in people's careers and set them in their trajectories is something that we can celebrate. How do we do more? And I'm going to give many more examples of this during my talk. And while doing that, to address the missing millions, this is a moment of ensuring that as we build this future, that we are ensuring accessibility and inclusivity in every form. And in doing so, there's the other question that people have. Oh, we are walking away from global partnerships and leadership. No, not true. In fact, we are working much harder in terms of working on establishing strong global partnerships, global relationships, global alliances. Tremendous amount of that. Every week I meet with at least a minister or two, or from some country who comes to NSF. In fact, next week we have one, the following week we have another. So we always are looking to opportunities where we find partnership possibilities. In fact, I say that like-minded countries who share in the fundamental values of openness, transparency, reciprocity, research integrity, and respect for intellectual property. If we all align on these fundamental values, then we can work together, and we should work together like no tomorrow. Okay? To the statement that John made, it's not what we can do, what we should do. Okay? So this is there's tremendous opportunity for us to do amazing things by bringing together global partnerships. So when I talk about global leadership, therefore, I talk about it as a shared imperative. It's not that one nation is a leader and other are followers, but we have a shared leadership imperative and we work together as like-minded partners. And that we accomplished that by, and that's why I'm here. We accomplished that by this frame of partnership as a foundation of everything. Partnership of every form, every type, every kind. When I took over this role 2 years ago, the first thing I did was to pick up the phone and talk to every agency head, and I said, how do we need to wire ourselves at the hip so that we can work together as between agencies. We are not looking at we do this, we do that, but instead, how do we do this together and do a lot better? How do we establish partnership with industry across the nation? As I said on Friday, we were there with Intel announcing the joint partnership in terms of what we are doing together in terms of workforce as well as science and technology aspirations in the area of semiconductors for the future. So partnerships of every type, every kind, foundations, international partnerships, city, state. We are unleashing these partnerships of every type so that NSF can pre-wire agreements with various partners so that we can do more better, faster. And that is mindset of innovation that should permeate every aspect of what we do. We cannot preach innovation by having programs on innovation when NSF itself is not innovative. It starts right at home. So I challenge ourselves every day. Are we thinking more innovatively as an agency than we have ever thought before? Are we wiring ourselves, configuring ourselves in ways that we can be more innovative than we have ever been? So that when we talk about unleashing innovation, we need to first be innovative as an agency. So these are some things that we have challenged ourselves. When I came to NSF, one of the things that I realized is NSF sometimes is not the best, understood by folks in terms of what it does. So I tried to frame it in this following way to express the impact of NSF. When you find something like a black hole in our galaxy, like a Sagittarius A star or whatever it is, okay, then people will attribute it immediately that must be NSF, right? But that's true, but that's just not NSF only. And so I said, how do I explain this as in the following way? And so I made it up, called the DNA of NSF. The DNA of NSF is made up of two strands. The one strand is the curiosity-driven, discovery-based explorations, which NSF is very well known for. But what NSF is probably not as much known for, which it does in unbelievable, scale, is also what I call use-inspired, solutions-focused translations and innovations. That these are highly symbiotic. That explorations make possible innovations, and it is not a pipeline. Okay, the pipeline thinking. Exploration make possible innovations, but innovations then challenge us to engage in more explorations. This symbiosis is what makes it a very rich kind of a future that we have in front of us. And that's how we move from the past to the present, and that's how we will move into the future. This rich symbiosis of exploration, innovation, exploration, innovation, and back and forth. And so that's the DNA of NSF. So you'll see a few things represented in this form. So in order to, because I think that, and I see myself as sometimes as a storyteller, because somebody has to tell the stories. To understand the impact of NSF so they can understand what NSF can do into the future. Let's take this story, for example, which you're all probably very, very familiar with. When ARPANET was launched, then NSF said, why not we develop something called NSFNet, right? We invested heavily in NSFNet in the early 80s, right? At that time, in 85, we had probably 2,000, computers connected. And then within 1993, grew to 2 million, rapidly scaled, talk about scale, rapidly scaled to over 2 million. The NSFNet made possible unbelievable discoveries and innovations because it connected all the universities across the nation so it could unleash those innovations at scale. And that led to a lot of other follow-on discoveries and innovations. I don't have to talk about that because you all know this very, very well. But just taking one example of a software-defined networks, the SDN concept. In fact, this was one of the expeditions in computing proposals, the SDN. It was ranked number 4 between us. Don't tell anybody that. And it would not have been funded. It almost would not have been funded. But NSF made possible that it carved the resources to fund the SDN. And that was the best thing that we did. The reason I present this is it's a struggle every time to see how we might fund the best ideas that are on the table. And this is what I talk about whenever I talk to all the legislators of why it's important to rapidly scale the investment of NSF. I give them data points. I'm a computer scientist, so like you, I give them data points. There are 45,000 proposals that NSF gets every year. We fund about 11 to 12,000 of them at a 25% success rate. But it turns out that so the gold standard peer review committees recommend about 33% of the proposals to be funded. So I've been a victim and of this, where I got a highly competitive rating and did not get funded. So therefore, I understand the pain. So we get 19,000 of those proposals that can be funded, but let's get dropped on the cutting room floor. So I advocate for very heavily in terms of how we are going to get more resources so that these ideas may be unleashed at speed and scale. So working hard on that. And you will see it's not just work. In the last 2 years, you'll see some of the effects, hopefully, of that, translating into reality in terms of what NSF's budget trajectory might look like into the future. So it's a work in progress. So talking about SDNs, therefore, SDNs has made possible unbelievable innovations and therefore implementations in all parts, all aspects of what we do in computing. So that the reason I say this is these are very, very important big ideas that we need to invest in at the right time so that we can unleash those unbelievable possibilities. And that has led to rapid scaling of how we commercialize as we see internet today. So that's one example of what has happened. So I spoke too much. So here you go. On again, and then try this. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So another example of this, in 1994 and the early 1990s, when the web pages were being built, maybe a few thousand web pages maybe that existed, right? And then a couple of agencies got together and said, how might we build an initiative to promote the future of thinking about the internet? And therefore, the Digital Libraries Initiative, DLI, came out of that in 1994. And it turned out that two graduate students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, of Hector Garcia Molina in Stanford, sent a proposal also for Digital Libraries Initiative at that time. And that was built on this concept of the PageRank algorithm. And the PageRank algorithm is not new. It has been invested in by NSF in economics in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And that became the basis for how Google got formed. So when we funded the DLI project for the two graduate students to submit the proposal, 5 years later, when they submitted the annual report, they said, we're founding a company called Google. And the rest is history. So when we talk about stories, NSF makes possible unbelievable innovations, not only in terms of, as I said, on the exploratory side, but also on the So that led the founding of the Google and PageRank, based on the PageRank algorithm. Now I think Hal Varian is a chief economist at Google, right? One of those early career award winners from NSF in terms of the PageRank work that he did, right? So that led to then forming the further innovations that has happened in terms of whether it is, the IBM work that is happening in terms of cloud work, in terms of all of the things that happens. So these are all investments of NSF, and now we are configuring ourselves, and you're going to hear more about this a little bit later in terms of the AI institutes and the investments that we're going to, if they'll be making in AI institutes, so that we can unleash more of such innovations that makes possible, rapid translations, like what has happened in companies like Google. And so here is another way of looking at it in storytelling, investment to impact. Let's look at impacts and investments in AI. When people talk about AI, I tell them, yes, we celebrate AI today, but this is a sustained investment over 5 decades at NSF and other agencies that have brought us to the point that we are here. I mean, let's talk about 70s, the investments in machine learning algorithms that essentially today, if you look at, the deep scale vision, in 2019, this company that is for automated driving using computer vision was acquired by Tesla, right? And so these are all, when you talk about tire tracks, you can go back and build those tire tracks back to the investments that NSF made, which got us to this point. Or if you look at the work that has happened in natural language processing, the investments in bag of words algorithms that NSF made, many decades ago. And today, if you look at the speech recognition software, it is in all apps, all websites. Wherever you go, you see that. It is not a happenstance. Again, tie tracks back to the many, many investments that NSF and other agencies made towards building this, this capacity. Likewise, the 80s, the Bayesian networks. that we're invested in, not only traffic prediction and modeling, whether it's medical diagnostic systems, all kinds of predictions that you see today, whether even credit card fraud detection, whatever that might be, all of that you can attribute it to investments made in Bayesian networks in the 80s, or the intelligent tutoring systems that were invested in the 80s and 90s. And we have one AI institute focused on intelligent tutoring systems, and we can talk about that more a little bit later. And likewise, it's not just limited to what happens in science directorate or engineering directorate. Let's look at this facial expression. The company Emotion was a work that was essentially inspired by the Social Behavioral Economic Sciences Directorate, the SBE Directorate. And this calls for how we need to work together across directorates, and this is something that we're promoting more of at NSF. So the Emotion startup was acquired in 2016 by Apple. So I think you get the drift. I don't have to convince you as the audience, the drift. But the reason I'm presenting this is when you go to the next TGIF party, or any party that you go, or any gathering you go, I want you to talk about these things with people. I'm serious. Because what people don't understand is the work that you do, and particularly in places like ISI, which makes this possible, like what John and Craig were mentioning, the unbelievable manifestations of what happens because of the fundamental research done here, as well as drawing upon fundamental research elsewhere, and then resulting in unbelievable outcomes. That people need to hear about that and not take that for granted, that there was fundamental research and basic investments that made this possible to where we are today. Otherwise, it doesn't automatically get connected. And so it's very, very important. So I keep talking about this, and I want you all to do the same. So what are the three major priorities of NSF as we move into the future? It is aligned with the pillars that I talked about. First of all, how do we strengthen the established NSF? How do we expand the frontiers? As I said, strengthening its speed and scale as one major focus of, we've been doing great things, and we need to double down, triple down, quadruple down in fundamental research, basic research investments, so that we can move this, the train at a much faster pace and with a lot more impact. As well as inspiring the missing millions. We have talked about that. And then when I came to NSF, one of the first things that we did was I said that we need to have a sort of a very intentional mechanism of translating NSF ideas into outcomes. And that we need to develop a cross-cutting directorate called Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. And I intentionally named it that, the TIP directorate, to tip the balance, so that we might accelerate the technologies that are being everyday worked on, whether it is AI or quantum or whatever that might be, advanced wireless, biotechnology, advanced manufacturing, it doesn't matter what it is, that you might rapidly translate those technologies by working in partnership with industry and entrepreneurial ecosystems. But more importantly, that translation then makes possible unbelievable invigoration and further acceleration and further enrichment of all the work that happens in the directorate, the vertical directorates, if you want to look at it that way. I will come to this point a little bit later. So that's an exceedingly important imperative, and I'm proud to say that we launched it within 1 year. That's the first new directorate of NSF in 31 years. It's not that anything was wrong of not having new directorate. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point is that this is the moment. This is the moment that is motivating us to do things in an intentional way, of course, in partnership with many, many other partners. So that's where we are today. Let me then walk through some of these things. As I said, curiosity-driven research is a bedrock, is a foundation, is what ultimately NSF is best at, and will always be best at, and will always be unique in terms of what we do. Let's take this. Just a few weeks ago, we were at the National Press Club announcing this amazing discovery again of this black hole in our own galaxy called Sagittarius A star. And that's made possible because of the unbelievable investments in computing. Unbelievable investments in computing over several decades. And to where we are right now, whether it is the Open Size Grid Consortium and the PATH project, and it contributed 20 million core hours to processing these images and simulations. Or whether it is investments we're making in Frontera, for example. And that supplied over 1 million node hours. And there's a largest ever simulation that was made possible in order to unearth this black hole. And that was impossible to do previously. And for every discovery and innovation, I always say it's about the people. It's about the people. It's every one of you that makes these things possible. So I celebrate always the people. So before the day when we had this this press conference, I went down and I met the entire team, and Katie is one of those folks who's a phenomenal scientist, a phenomenal intellect, a phenomenal person. And if you look at Katie's journey, she's now a professor at Caltech. But her journey started as a high school student, impacted by NSF, where she participated in NSF-funded research at Purdue University. That's where her journey started, or maybe even before, right? And then as an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan, she worked on an NSF data assimilation project. And then she won the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship at MIT, where she went with that to MIT in 2011. And then during the time as a graduate student, she won 4 more NSF awards for her graduate research at MIT. And then she got the NSF Career Award in 2021, the award that she has right now, that continues to advance what she's doing in a very, very impactful way. This is just one example of a person, one story. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of Katies that we can talk about. Some of those are here. But we need to tell these stories in a cogent way, because people don't understand the impact of NSF. I always say NSF inside like Intel inside. The NSF DNA is inside, but doesn't express itself in terms of talking about what NSF meant to people. And I want every one of you who have been impacted by NSF to talk about that. The reason is it's important for people to see what science, technology, and engineering can do, and what investments in NSF and other agencies can do to advance prosperity for the nation and help make real things happen. It's very, very important. That takes me to the KDs that we talked about. Yes, there are many KDs here and elsewhere, but there are millions of KDs who are not having the opportunity to actually be those KDs that could be. And that's a shame. And that's what we are focused on intensely. That's the other thing that we are working on very, very hard at NSF. In terms of how we can change the trajectory of ensuring that we inspire those K-12 students in rural areas, as well as in urban areas, as well as all 50 states of the nation. And every one of us has a responsibility to do that. Every one of us has a responsibility to do that, because what we do can inspire unbelievable STEMs and create unbelievable STEM sparks in people. And therefore, we want to double clearly the number of women in computing, of course, across STEM. And what is in computing is across STEM. You can just, they are synonymous if you want to look at it that way. Hispanic and Latino talent being doubled and tripled, and African American talent being doubled, and Native Hawaiian, Native American, Native Alaskan being quadrupled. There's a lot more to be done very, very quickly. And so we're intensely focused on that. And I can give you stories of that too, but I'm not going to spend all the time doing that in the interest of time. What are we doing on computing on that front? So in 2009, we started investing in the AP Computer Science Principles Development Program. So how are we doing? What is the metric of progress? Okay. In 2016, the largest AP Computer Science Principles Program was launched in history. More than 116,000 students have enrolled in these AP Computer Science Principles. In fact, the interest in wanting to pursue computing from 18% to 26% already, just in a very few years. But even more importantly, of these 116,000 students, 40,000 are women in 2020. 40,000 are female. And how many were them in 2017? 1/3 of it. So we're tripling. We're tripling in a matter of a couple of years. That's the rate of progress that we need to see. When we talk about real progress, we need to have measurements of how we progress in these directions. I'm grateful to many of you who are making this possible. So I just want to challenge ourselves to do this better. But in order to do this, one of the more major important things, and we were talking about this, Yolanda, I remember that we need role models. We need role models. How do we have more role models? We get more role models by ensuring that we are training those people that can become faculty members and industry leaders in computing. So how do we increase the exposure to academic careers at institutions that already have good diversity in their PhD programs? And then on top of that, add the number of possibilities for people who can enter those places where we don't have enough diversity yet in their programs. How do we increase the diversity of undergraduate students and motivating them to graduate programs? How do we increase the diversity of PhD students everywhere? So these are very important simultaneous activities that we need to intensely focus on. And NSF is working very hard on this front. I can tell you that. Not just talk, but action. And I'm proud to say that the science director is doing a fantastic job in this regard. Margaret Martinosi and the colleagues in science directorate are doing an amazing job in terms of constantly looking at what can we do better, what can we do better, what can we do better. Talking about role models, what better role model than Margaret Martinosi as our assistant director of the Computer Information Sciences and Engineering? What better role model than Susan Margulies as the AD of Engineering? What better role model than Alex Eisen as our leader of the Geosciences Directorate? What better role model as Joanne Torno is the Assistant Director of our Bio Directorate? What better role model than Craig Anderson, as the head of our Social Behavioral Economic Sciences Directorate? What better role model than Sean Jones, an African American leading our Mathematical Physical Sciences Directorate? I can go on and on and on. So that's what, when we talk about role models, we have to role model by leadership. Leadership representing what we are desiring for, to find that unbelievable talent that is there and make sure that the leadership is represented by that unbelievable talent that is there. And so at NSF, we are deeply committed. And if you are wondering whether the commitment is real or not, go look at the leadership team and you will see that it speaks for itself. Unbelievable talent. And therefore, when we talk about the science directorate and what makes these things possible, the Broadening Participation in Computing program is an excellent example. Launched in 2006, we have more than 12 BPC alliances already. These are national and regional collaborations across academic institutions, educators, professional societies, community organizations, and industrial partners. How do we develop the interest in skills? How do we ensure that opportunities to pursue computing are made possible everywhere? These 12 academic BPC alliances, one example is the CASI Alliance. Because one of the CASI Alliance's objective is by 2030, we want 20% of the representation of computing to be from the Hispanic community. How do we collaborate in that context with companies like Google, establish regional networks, and partnership with other HSIs? In fact, I spent a lot of time talking to chancellors and presidents of HSI institutions. Likewise, I spent a lot of time talking to presidents and chancellors of HBCUs and other MSI. I spent an hour and a half talking to all the tribal leaders across the nation. Just last week, I was inaugurating the telescope, the solar telescope, the largest ever solar telescope in Maui, DKIST. And I spent about 3 hours talking to the native Hawaiian community. How do we find those ideas? How do we address those challenges that they face and bring it back and see how NSF's programs can then make possible, realizing those opportunities for individuals everywhere. And in that, again, I seek the partnership with everyone. Every one of you has the power to change this direction. It doesn't happen by NSF because NSF decides to do so. It never will be. NSF, I always say, is an enabler, is a catalyst. The work really happens here, right here. And that's why I'm going all over the country, everywhere. People are telling me, you're crazy traveling everywhere. You don't sleep. I said, that doesn't matter. Got to get it done. There's no time. So you all need to make sure that we wake up. When we talk about the 50th anniversary of computing, fantastic. Let's celebrate that. But we have a lot of work, folks. That's why I came here. Celebrations are fine, but we have to dedicate ourselves to doing a lot better, a lot faster, a lot more. So I hope you see the urgency. You feel it, I hope. So the BPC net. So it's not enough that we have them as, as esoteric projects isolated everywhere. As good as they are, we need to institutionalize these ideas. So the BPC net is one of those. Working with the Computing Research Association, CRA, again, doing great work across the nation with CCC and others. So how do we make sure that we develop this BPC net idea so that people can then, as part of all the proposals that people write, mid-scale, large scale, even small scale, how do we make sure the BPC net kind of constructs allow people to quickly integrate the BPC ideas as part of the proposal preparation? So it doesn't become an onerous thing, not only to put their content together, but more importantly, actually execute them successfully. So I'm very proud to say that the Broadening and Participation Computing BPC net is now launched as part of how we are looking at the broadening participation of the future. Switching gears. How does NSF make possible through investments that we're making in large conceptualization? We talked about individual faculty like KDs, and then many, single PI or multi-PI projects. But how do we now look at it in terms of sustained investments, expressions? I talked about expressions in computing earlier when we talked about SDNs. This is another catalyzation of an expeditions in computing program, one of the largest programs, funding programs of size 15 million in scale now. It used to be 10 million when I was a reviewer many years ago in the early versions, right? Look at the AMP lab at Berkeley. And this was one of the expressions catalyzed by the Expressions Computing Award. Not just only because of that. A precursor to that was many, many career awards, many other small awards, and other kinds of size investments and other investments from other agencies that brought them to the point that AMP lab is where it is today in terms of inventing industry-leading open source Berkeley analytics stack software, digital analytics stack software platforms. And many, many companies being brought together, working together, over 36 corporate sponsors advancing this world-class research. But what is more exciting about AMP lab is the fact that we have hundreds and hundreds of alumni who are doing unbelievable things in industry, but also incubating a number of companies. So when you look at a number of startups that have been spawned by some of the alumni, and the ideas that come out of the AMP lab, including Luxio or Determined.ai or D2IQ or Databricks, all of these are unbelievable innovations that come about from one investment in expressions and size computing. I'm just giving you an example of the scale of what the impact is. If you look at Databricks, if you want to go into this a little bit more in terms of what Databricks does, talk more. Okay, here you go. It's like a counter, you know. It's worse than my wife. This kid. I just try to keep it light as much as I can because it becomes too much otherwise. So don't tell my wife that. Databricks. So created by AMP Lab alumni and NSF-funded researchers. Okay. This is the world leading or the first and only data lakehouse platform in the cloud, creating an open unified platform for data and AI. I'm sure you all know about that. But the more important thing is that this has been invested in by many, many projects of NSF. Many, many projects of NSF. 7 founders received investments from over 20 different NSF awards, including career awards, as well as GRFPs and other things that are augmenting that. Today, it has surpassed 1 billion in revenue. 1 billion in revenue, the AMP project. And now valued, Databricks as a company is valued at 38 billion. And even more importantly, more than 7,000 organizations worldwide now rely on Databricks. So one expedition in computing investment, I'm just not claiming all the credit for that, but this unbelievable work by many, many people. But I'm just saying these are catalyzing, and that's what these projects should do. That's what NSF should do to make sure that we're investing in these kinds of catalyzing efforts in addition to incubating efforts through the investment through career awards and other kinds of small awards that NSF makes. So now to the future of computing research. If you look at 3 different flavors of sort of how we are looking at into the future, Margaret talks about it elegantly in these 3 terms, and Teddy, you are probably very, very familiar because we discussed it with the advisory board. One of the platforms is how do we compute in a post-Moore law world? That's one of the ways in which we are looking at it, and I look at it as a seismic shift. Transcendence of AI for everyone, and designing beneficial socio-technical systems. So these are 3 broad categories of how computing investments are being thought about in addition to strengthening the basic investments in computing of all types. So one of these is the FUSE program in the post-Moore law thinking, the FUSE, the future of semiconductors. How do we ensure that the co-design, how do we empower the co-design of materials, devices, and systems to unleash innovation? And in fact, much of what has been happening in the last few weeks, August 9th, the president signed the CHIPS plus Science Act, if you're all paying attention. It's been a tremendous amount of labor, of love over the last 2 years by many, many people in terms of how do we unleash the innovations in semiconductor design and workforce development, but also in all aspects of what we can do in science, technology, engineering. And so this is something that, we're very, very proud that, there's much progress being made. I was with the president as I said, in Ohio on Friday with the Intel CEO, Pat Gelsinger, celebrating this event and making this announcement, and as happening places all across the nation. So how do we close the gap? In order for these to be successful, it's not just to onshore, but also advance into the future, but more importantly, have the workforce that's contributing to the success of these into the future. Okay, so FUSE is an example of how do we do that. And so this is, as I said, signed on August 9th by the president, and then September 9th, we already launched the first foundation for the Intel facility there. Okay, I didn't spend, yeah. So now to the AI. I just want to spend some time on the AI part. The AI part, as when I came in to the agency 2 years ago, we were about to launch the AI institutes. And one of the things that I said is maybe we should name it as AI in every state. That is, we should not assume that AI is in the usual suspect places only, but AI inspirations can be at K-12 level, community college level, university research, of course, industry, as well as centers like ISI, and what we can do in the entrepreneurial ventures everywhere and communities everywhere. So I'm very proud to say that in the first round, and I said that this can be only expanded through this mindset of partnerships, right? So we had a $100 million investment, $20 million per institute, 5 of them that the NSF has committed for 5 years. But we said that should not be the only way in which we realize that dream. We have to rapidly expand partnership. In the first iteration, believe it or not, we had, of course, partnership with the Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security. But what is more important is that in the first iteration, we had 2 fully funded institutes by the USDS NIFA. 2 AI institutes, they fully funded $220 million scale. Okay? And so we had 7 institutes launched. As you'll see, the 2 of them on the right-hand side and the bottom are both of them food-based and agriculture-based AI institutes. How do we advance the future of smart agriculture? And how can NIFA and USDA be the investor in addition to NSF investments of $100 million? And so one of those AI institutes in agriculture is a Farms Institute, the future of agricultural resilience, management, and sustainability. Acronyms, FARMS. We are all good in computing, in forming acronyms. So FARMS is a consortium, and I was there, in fact, for this AI institute. I went to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And what was exciting about is this third thing that we talk about, industry partnership, a company, EarthSense, that has incubated out of this FARMS initiative, AI Institute, an unbelievable roboticized way of doing agriculture, doing the soil measurement, moisture measurement, nutrient measurement, all of that in real time, by a robot that goes up and down and stuff, people having to do this. And then very precisely addressing the needs so that we are not spreading water, wasting water and or fertilizer and other nutrients in a sort of global way, but in a very precise way. So examples like that are excellent examples of how AI has tremendous impact in terms of what it can do. So in the second iteration, we challenge ourselves more. We said it's not enough to have just 2 partners. We are now going to expand the partnerships. In fact, we got one of them, which was an industry consortium of Accenture, Google, Amazon, and Intel, partnering to the tune of $20 million. So we were able to now launch 11 institutes in the second iteration. 11 plus the 7 institutes originally, 18 institutes, span 40 states of the United States and the District of Columbia. We're about to release the third tranche of institutes, and I'm reasonably confident that we will get to every state representation. That's exceedingly important. That doesn't mean that everything has to be research-based. It can be all kinds of inspiration that we can have. But that's the kind of thinking that when we talk about everywhere and anywhere, we need to make sure that mindset is present, but not taking away from the gold standard merit review process, because people will often say, but if that is the thinking, then are you now going to dilute the merit review process? Absolutely not, quite the opposite. So let me give you an example of what we're doing on that front. So just in the last year, we are launching a new program called Granted, Growing Research Access Through Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. That's the acronym. What it does is it provides research. You all have a tremendous research proposal machine shops that helps people write the great ideas and successful proposals, review them, I'm sure do all of the partnership, everything, right? So institutions which are the research 2 institutions, level 2 institutions, Carnegie, level 2 institutions, or the MSIs don't have the same level of infrastructure. So what might Granted do to provide that infrastructure as a virtual resource that people can tap into so that they too can exercise their ideas in the best form so they can be successful? So again, action, not just talk. Action about how do we get the best ideas everywhere to be successful in the gold standard merit review process. And again, partnerships are required there. So I strongly encourage you to think about partnerships. When I talked about the first AI Institute, Tuskegee University was a partner in the FARMS initiative, a HBCU. So we have to make sure that we are partnering because talent and ideas are also there, great ideas, but more importantly, talent often comes to those institutions that requires to be lifted up. And it's exceedingly important that we do that and not imagine that those talents is only coming to the R1 institutions as important as they are. So I'm very happy about the AI institutes. And the second round, Engage AI Institute is one of those examples of an AI institute that's focused on learning AI-driven learning. As we all know, coming out of COVID, that learning can be anywhere, everywhere, at the highest quality possible? And how do we build team-based learning? And how do we build richer learning environments so that we might have this inclusion process built in a much more, sort of intentional way? So that's one example of, okay, good. Somebody talked to me about this as I was walking into the building today, sustainability in computing. And I like the way Margaret has framed it. Sustainability in computing in concert with computing for sustainability, both happening at the same time. We just issued a DCL for sustainability in computing. When you look at the number of things, oftentimes when they talk about sustainability in computing, it is about, maybe we look at the energy consumption, but there's a lot more than just energy consumption, the e-waste, right there, the greenhouse gas emissions clearly, right? And a whole host of things that contribute to how you might, even the materials. How do we make sure that rare earth materials are used in the most effective way and not just depleted? So all of those things. And so we just issued a DCL, and I strongly encourage you to participate in this and send some really strong proposals in this area, because it's very, very important as we are thinking about a resilient planet in the future. And therefore, computing for sustainability, clearly there are tremendous opportunities in terms of what we are looking at, what we can do to advance. So this is an imperative that we are going to be looking at. And clearly, this is a socio-technical issue, systemic thinking. It's not just about what you do in computing. It's about computing infuses with geo, bio, mathematical, physical sciences, most importantly, social, behavioral, economic sciences, all and engineering work together. And so there's a lot of interesting possibilities here that I think we should take full advantage of. So I go back to this innovation anywhere, opportunities everywhere, and this DNA structure. And if you look at what are we doing in that regard, I know some of you might be interested in hearing more about the TIP Directorate. So that we launched, and there are 4 major components of the TIP Directorate, which is activating public-private partnerships. How do we ensure greater, more enriched and scaled pathways for entrepreneurship? How do we expand the lab-to-market platforms? And one of the things that I insisted that we need to do, and this is, I'll talk about this a little bit later, is how do we get the Bell Lab-like entities to public-private partnerships everywhere across the nation around different contexts and topics of interest. So that's the fundamental thesis behind the Regional Innovation Engine concept. Let's talk about these one by one. Accelerating public-private partnerships. Let's look at how are we doing there. It used to be the case that most of our funded projects, whether it is an engineering research center or an IUCRC of NSF, brought in industry partnerships as part of the building the partnership base for the particular program. But we have also been working very diligently in terms of pre-wiring partnerships, like what I talked about in the AI institutes, pre-wiring partnership with industry and other entities, so that we can start to look at the call for proposals itself as a pre-wired partnership, rather than after the fact, you going and getting the partnerships. I call them direct partnerships in addition to indirect partnerships that you all make possible when you write proposals together by bringing other partners, industry and otherwise. So this platform for advanced wireless research is an excellent example of that. The POWER program, as we call it, PAWR. The POWER program is a $100 million program, 50 million from NSF, 50 million invested, real dollars and in-kind contributions from industry. How do we advance the future of thinking about networks through the POWER program? Rural broadband being deployed to provide more access. RINGS is another program. You might be very familiar with that too. Resilient, next generation networks is another program. Again, it's through partnership with many industry, and you can think of all the industry, the usual suspects, all of the people that are there in the wireless space are partners in this. And so we're very proud of how we are trying to configure these partnerships a priori so that we can launch these better. I talked about Intel. Intel and us, when they launched the 20 billion fabrication manufacturing plant being put in Ohio, they have a $100 million, and this is what the president was talking about in his remarks on Friday, the $100 million co-investment between NSF and Intel to ensure that talent of all kinds, skilled technical workforce, as well as research talent and research ideas being empowered by this co-investments between Intel and NSF. So I'm very proud to say that this partnership is rich. We have many dimensions of partnership with Intel, but we are working even more intentionally. I was just transacting emails to the CEO this morning in terms of how do we move forward in a more comprehensive way with Intel. Powering innovation everywhere clearly has also components of how do we ensure that this entrepreneurial mindset is much more permeated everywhere. Entrepreneurial mindset. How do we get that? iCode programs, and you saw the recent announcements of the iCode networks, and how do we scale it 100 times more? How do we get entrepreneurial fellowships for our PhD students? How do we get more lab-to-market platforms, SBR, SCTR? This is a company in California, it turns out, and which is doing what I call lettuce bots, And in the interest of time, I will not go into that. The regional innovation engines. I'm proud to say that in the regional innovation engine that the call that we launched, we had 700 concept outlines, all parts of the nation being covered, all 50 states represented, and you see that right there. And this is something that when I talk about intentionality and intensity, that's the manifestation of that intentionality and intensity that we need to exhibit, all of us together. So building innovation ecosystems therefore requires this partnership that I talk about. And I know that Terry stood up, which means that I have to close. So I'm a professor, so they give me hour and 15-minute lecture classes. And I usually filibuster them so that I don't get any tough questions from students. So I'm just kidding. So I'm used to that. So this requires a redesign of NSF itself. And so what we've been promoting is not the concept of pillars, but concept of this fused way of looking at. If you want the community to partner, then you need NSF to partner in the same way, because we are the investors. So this is a new way of looking at the designing for the future with Office of Integrative Activities, TIP, and Office of International Science Engineering, interleaving with all of them. So I hope that this gave you a good overview of NSF and some things about computing that you thought that you might want to hear about, and a few things that hopefully that you'll be able to participate in the next cycles of investment and what we might be thinking about in the future, and configuring yourselves and wiring yourself that way. And I look forward to your tremendous engagement, because that's what is going to make things happen. All the things that I talk about will not happen unless people, every one of you, is going to now double, triple, quadruple your efforts and outcomes. And that's what's going to make things happen. So I challenge every one of us to see how we can do this. We've got a poor computer scientist as the leader of NSF now, I think the first one. And so I'm trying to see how computing can be thought of as a fabric, as a thread of everything that we do in everything that happens to unleash prosperity all across the nation, economic, national security, as well as societal prosperity. Thank you all. I try to speak fast to compress myself. My PhD thesis was data compression, so I couldn't do it with my algorithm, so I try to speak fast. So thank you.
Very much. We have a few minutes for questions here in the room, and also I'll be taking some off the Hublio platform for all of our remote attendees. We do have a microphone, but I believe the ceiling mics here should pick you up. So if you have a question, please stand up and speak loudly. Wael got his hand up first.
Well,
thank you for an amazing talk. It was very nice.
Well, please introduce yourself.
My name is Wael Abdelmajid. I'm a research director with ISI and a research associate professor with ECE.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Again, thank you for an amazing talk. How do you respond to criticism that NSF and NIH are not risk-taking agencies compared to DARPA, for example, and on the surface, they fund high-risk, high-reward research, but in reality, the research has to be done first before NSF funds it?
So I have heard that said many times, not that I totally agree with it, but because I see a lot of projects that NSF funds, which is purely high risk, high reward. But this is a culture, as you know. What you want to do is you want to make sure that program officers are given more empowerment. The difference between DARPA and NSF is we rely on the gold standard merit review process, which then is the community that comes, and you all are participating in the process. And we rely on your judgment and your expertise and your wisdom as we are choosing these projects. And combined with that, the program officers do have some independence to disregard certain recommendations and still fund things because they think that that's high risk. And there are many, many examples, and maybe I should include some stories of this fourth ranked proposal with the SDN is a good example of that too. So having said that, this is a culture issue. And I would like to think that with the TIP Directorate and what you're doing with the redesign of NSF, that we are working hard to see how we might promote more of the high risk, high reward thinking, which is already there. How do we strengthen that at speed and scale as we do other things? So I'll take that as something that we'll do more work on, but it's not, I don't say any criticism is not fair, but it's not fully fair, if you let me put it that way. But we need to work on it. So we take that seriously. Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead, Yolanda, and I'll get somebody online too.
Yeah, also.
You want to do that first?
So we do have a question online from Ravi Vadapalli. He says, domain sciences are finding shortages in graduate students interested in research. What efforts, resources, and programs are impossible to improve the research innovation outcome?
So Ravi, if you're asking me that whether we are funding, whether there's going to be more funding for domain scientists at the graduate student level, I can agree with you more. So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the GRFPs. How do we scale more GRFPs? When you're working on that, you'll see the increase. And with the increased investments in science, one of the areas that we will invest in is much more graduate student support, because that's the pathway for, and it's in all disciplines, not just in one discipline, but all disciplines. Because I think that's very, very important. So, excuse me. So as part of that, we're also thinking about what might we do in terms of making sure the students are appropriately compensated for the graduate studies, so that they're not driven away from graduate programs just because they don't feel that they're being supported enough. So on both fronts, we're working on that at NSF.
Getting you some water. Yolanda?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just, I was the president on Friday. I was tested because I was very close to him, talking to him. So worried, oh my God, he's
Talking too much.
Exactly. Yeah.
We can tell it's from talking.
Excuse me. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you to give advice to an organization like ISI. We've been here 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of capability,
Mm-hmm.
and all the things that you described, it's a tremendous vision, very ambitious, but I'm looking at all the early career researchers and the young students in the room trying to connect themselves to that vision, and it seems very intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you to give advice to ISI on how to support our younger researchers to have successful careers in this complex ecosystem of research that you laid out, especially globally. Many of them are international students. So tell us how to support their careers best. I know it's a passion for you.
Karen, a great question. So here's what I would tell you. How many anthropologists do you have at ISI? Zero. I suspected that. So first, I think you need to change ISI's culture to be much more inclusive of other disciplines. If you want to really change ISI's trajectory into the future, it's my humble opinion. I say it with humility. So you asked me, so I'm telling you. I would bring in disciplinary scientists of different backgrounds here, either full-time. I understand that you run on a soft money funded trajectory. I understand that. Either through people being housed here or people being connected here. Because the students have to see the environment, which is a blend of these unbelievable computing folks working with other kinds of disciplinary scientists. That's what the real world is, and that's what when they go out, they're going to be successful in solving the problems that we're talking about here. That's the first advice I have. Second is, how many partnerships do you have with MSIs? MSI institutions, minority serving institutions, HBCUs,
One or two?
HSIs, tribal colleges, community colleges.
A few.
Yeah.
We do.
So how do you scale that? Because if you want real diversity of perspectives, I always say diversity is not just a good thing to do or the right thing to do. Yes, it is. But it's more importantly, diversity brings perspectives, experiences, and that enriches all the things that we do. So we have to do that. And when we talk about global partnerships, how do we bring global like-minded partners into the table? I was in India just a couple of weeks ago, and we announced, and again, in these partnerships, I am about speed and scale. So when I met the first time, I told them in 1 year, we will have projects launched, not hand-wringing, signing MOUs. I said, MOUs is worth only the paper that we sign it on. I'm not interested in MOUs. I'm interested in action. So we launched 35 projects. Their digital technology hubs and our folks connected and invested. So when you talk about international folks, therefore, how do you bring in international partners in a real way? So only when you create a culture of that in the institute will you be able to tackle the problems. You do a fantastic job. Please don't take it as you're asking about expansion of objective and meeting this sort of societal goals also, in addition to meeting the needs of the nation in terms of technology, science advancements, as well as military and national security objectives. I applaud you. I mean, you're just superb. So this is just not I'm talking about the icing on the cake, not the cake. So I think there is a tremendous opportunity here, Yolanda. This is my feeling. I hope I answered your question.
So I think on that note, we need to close because I'm mindful we have over 150 people that are online who are lining up for our next session. So a few reminders and then we'll thank Panch again. Please go to your pods. We will be starting the next session as close to on time as we can. There's a poster board outside that has a list of pods alphabetized by first name per pod, and we have escorts in the building that will help you find those pods. so that we can start our next session. And I really want to thank Panch very much for coming here for a great presentation.
It was right in the beginning, and Kim, if you will please stand up. Kim is an executive officer in the office of the director. And the entire team in the office of the director is amazing people that she single-handedly took every aspect of this planning, and not only this, but others too. So thanks, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you.